And thank you all for being here. For those of you who do not know me, I am Eddie Weeks, your legislative librarian. Your legislative library is just across the hall here in Suite 804. Please stop by and say hi at any time. I'm there to answer just about any historical question you may have about the legislature, old laws, past legislators, prior legislation, the legislative process, and even what is the story of the Cordell Hull building, the legislative office building since 2017? What a great question. Now, it was in 2017 that the 110th General Assembly of the state of Tennessee moved all of its offices, committee rooms, and conference rooms from the War Memorial Building, the Legislative Plaza, and the Rachel Jackson Building into the Cordell Hull building. That move was not easy and was not always pleasant. But it was eventually accomplished, and the legislature took possession of this building in November 2017. That move was commemorated by 2018 Senate Joint Resolution 548, commemorating the first year the Tennessee General Assembly makes the newly renovated Cordell Hull building its home. You'll hear bits and pieces of this resolution throughout this talk. What you have to understand, though, is that the history of the Cordell Hull building is much older than that. 1947, Public Chapter 160 authorized the state to sell $1.5 million in state bonds for the purpose of providing funds with which to erect and furnish an office building to be used for housing various state offices, agencies, and instrumentalities. Notice what is not there: the legislature. This building was not built for the legislature. Notice what else is not there: the location. Where this office building was to be built was not yet set. In fact, this act created a commission with authority and jurisdiction to select the site on which said building will be constructed, and authorized that commission to acquire, by purchase or condemnation, a site for the location of said building, in the event that property already owned by the state is unsuitable. So, what property was owned by the state? This is a scan from the 1947 Blue Book. We can recognize the Capitol, the War Memorial Building, and the John Sevier Building, which was not yet named the John Sevier Building. On this map, 1 is the Capitol, 2 is the State Planning Commission, 3 is the Department of Highways, 4 and 5 are the Department of Health, 6 is the building that will later be named the John Sevier Building, 8 is Victory Park, 9 is the War Memorial Building, and 11 is the Supreme Court Building, built in the 1930s, which is still there today. Other offices, including those marked 7 and 10 on that map, were in rented quarters or in other buildings not owned by the state. But this time to consider the site for a new state office building was also a time to consider other improvements to existing buildings, such as a tunnel leading into the Capitol so that you would not have to climb the stairs to get into the Capitol. This is from the Tennessean, January 30th, 1949. The construction of a series of pedestrian tunnels under the Capitol grounds is suggested by Harold Miller as a possible solution to the step climbing problem at the Capitol. Miller would have the tunnels extend from major state buildings under the Capitol. Elevators would then be installed to connect the Capitol with the tunnels. Remember that for later. The only way in or out of that building was all those steps, from the street level all the way up to the House and Senate chambers. 212 steps to get to those chambers. That article also mentioned that Harold Miller, executive director of the State Planning Commission, thought that the new state office building should be erected on state-owned property at the northeast corner of 6th Avenue North and Gay Street, and that a tunnel should extend from the building to the Capitol. 1949, Public Chapter 287 appropriated a sum sufficient to enable the governor to purchase any real estate adjoining, adjacent to, or in the neighborhood of the state capitol, considered by him necessary upon which to construct any state buildings, or considered by him necessary to clean up the unsightly conditions that exist within said territory surrounding the Capitol. The 1949 Blue Book, which came out after that 1949 Act, uses the same picture from the 1947 Blue Book, but the legend accompanying this picture in the 1949-50 Blue Book shows that the State Planning Commission building and the Department of Highways and Public Works building have been demolished to make way for that new state office building. They're a little ahead of themselves, but the course was set. This project would be known as the Capitol Hill Redevelopment Project, a long-term recreation of Capitol Hill and its surrounding areas to clean up the unsightly conditions surrounding the Capitol. But the first step was demolition of what was already here. The Tennessean, January 15, 1950, work was started last week on the interior demolition of the State Highway building on 6th Avenue. The site of the building is a part of the location selected for the new state office building. The Tennessean, April 21, 1950, makes a few interesting references to a new bridge across the Cumberland River and to a proposed boulevard circling Capitol Hill, and states the land near the new office building will be made available to the city of Nashville as a site for an auditorium. This picture is used in the 1951-52 Blue Book, showing what's been done. Several buildings are noticeably missing to the east and west of the Capitol in this new picture, showing the now vacant lots. This picture and many others in this presentation are from the State Librarian Archives digital photograph collection. Others are from the Nashville Public Library digital collection. This is a view from the north showing the future state office building under construction on the left-hand side. Construction seems to have gone well, and by this photo, you can make out the three wings of the building. To the right of the building, you can see two buildings which were marked as buildings 4 and 5 on those earlier maps. Those were the Department of Public Health buildings, at least one of which really looks like an old house that was repurposed by the state. This photo from the west is circa 1952. The new state office building at the top left is now complete, as is the new State Librarian Archives building at the bottom center. And yes, note the state of Tennessee outline at the bottom left. The Tennessean, December 5th, 1952. Dedicatory ceremonies for the laying of the cornerstone will take place at 11 a.m. today. Governor Gordon Browning will be the principal speaker. A leather-bound copy of the current Tennessee Blue Book will be placed in a copper box to be inserted in the cornerstone. And there you see that copper box, presumably with a Blue Book inside it, being sealed into the wall, there to remain as long as this building stands. And here you see Governor Gordon Browning standing beside that cornerstone at the dedication of this building. What you may not know, though, is that that cornerstone is not at a corner of this building. It is near the center of the building on the west side of the building, as shown by Governor Kenny Croson. The cornerstone also gives us the name of the architectural firm Hart and McBride. Now, whether the building is Art Deco style or modern style with Art Deco influences is up to you. But of course, not everything went well with the construction of this building. The Tennessean, March 18, 1953, new state building lacks partition funds. Governor Frank Clement said yesterday he had learned no provision had been made to pay for office partitions in the $7,500,000 new state office building. He had been advised unofficially that the interior partitions will cost an additional $900,000. The governor described the situation as a hodgepodge of confusion. Thank goodness that description no longer fits what occurs in this building. But now, with the building mostly done, it was time to add a few finishing touches to the grand building. The Tennessean, March 2nd, 1952, Governor Gordon Browning views the head of a woman by Puryear Mims, Nashville sculptor, who will do the sculpting work on the new state office building. So who was Puryear Mims? Courtesy WPLN, Mims was perhaps the first to make a professional go of sculpture in Nashville. He was also a local, the son of a Vanderbilt professor. The resulting sculptures surrounding this new state office building are the Family Group, also known as Tennesseans on the Farm, the Equestrian Group, also known as Tennesseans at War, the TVA Group, also known as Tennesseans in Industry. And note that the man's, or is it a machine's, left hand is actually becoming a part of a TVA dam, while his right hand is very mechanical. And the Mountain Group, also known as Tennesseans at Home. This is the only one of the 4 statues on the east side of the building, and the only one where you cannot see everyone from the front of the sculpture as they're all walking in a straight line forward. The building was now done, but the state now had a new problem. What should the building be named? The Tennessean, January 10th, 1954, the state wants a name for its new office building, and some departments are already clamoring for more space in the building that won't be completed for another 6 months. The multi-million-dollar structure is known in capital circles as the new state office building. It didn't take long. The Tennessean, January 31st, 1954, this pretty quartet of state workers wants the new state office building named for Cordell Hull. And 1955, Public Chapter 39 by the 79th General Assembly of the state of Tennessee formally named the building the Cordell Hull Building. So who was Cordell Hull? Cordell Hull was born October 2nd, 1871 in Olympus, Tennessee. He served in the State House of Representatives from 1893 until 1896, the 48th and 49th General Assemblies. He was later elected to the United States House of Representatives, where he served 22 years. He was then elected to the United States Senate in 1930, but resigned his seat in the Senate to become United States Secretary of State, a position he held for the next 11 years and 9 months, making him the longest-serving United States Secretary of State in the history of this nation. Because of his work throughout World War II, in 1945, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In recognition of his efforts for peace and understanding in the Western Hemisphere, his trade agreements, and his work to establish the United Nations. The quote outside this building reads, "Peace has become as essential to civilized existence as the air we breathe is to life itself." Of course, not everyone was happy with the new building. The Tennessean, March 14th, 1954, motorbike useful in state building. There are miles of corridors in the 11-story building. Absence of partitions makes the floor space area seem twice as large. Even so, the corridors seem to stretch for miles. That's not much of an exaggeration. The main corridors in this building are 1/10 of a mile long. And whereas, once the Cordell Hull building was ready to receive occupants in 1954, the first to move into the new state office building were the following: Department of Education, Railroad and Public Utilities Commission, State Planning Commission, Department of Personnel, Game and Fish Commission, Conservation Department, Department of Safety, Adjutant General, Department of Mental Health, Department of Health, and Children's Services. The health department was particularly pleased with their new quarters. The Tennessean, January 17, 1954, the Tennessee State Health Department, which now has the poorest facilities in some respects of any department in the nation, will have about the best when it moves into its new quarters. Of course, the Department of Health being in this building probably means that the state morgue was in this building too. Dead bodies from all over this state were sent to this building and kept here. Also in this building, there were live sheep, laboratory sheep kept for research purposes. If you've ever wondered why this 8th floor has these odd roof areas, now you know why those sheep were kept on this roof. You want proof? The enclosure atop the building will provide quarters for laboratory sheep. Those laboratory sheep were then used for research, tuberculosis research. They were not necessarily live for long, but to this day, we don't know if our ghosts in this building go boo or if they go bah. The 1956 Blue Book gives this description of the work done. A new 10-story state office building has been constructed on 6th Avenue. This building has been named the Cordell State Office Building. This area, once presenting an aspect of slums, is now being reclaimed, and architectural landscape designs have been prepared to serve present and future buildings by providing convenient and adequate parking space and the building of necessary streets for state and public purposes. Such plans are now in the process of execution and will be ready to provide all required services. The historical background of the efforts to preserve and improve the environs of the state capitol may be interesting to know, hence a very brief account. A corporation known as the Tennessee Capitol Association secured a charter from the state, the particular purposes of which were the preservation of the state capitol in its dignity and beauty, the extension and proper treatment of the grounds, the acquisition by the state of the adjoining property for state purposes, the erection by the state of state buildings on said property of such construction as will harmonize with the present state capitol. The present overall planning considered and now underway is in harmony with and is an appropriate recognition of the far-sightedness of the Tennessee Capitol Association. The building was now finished. The Tennessee Capitol Hill redevelopment project was well underway, and it was time for the state to go to work in its new building. This photo is circa 1954, showing the building from the southwest. The old Department of Public Health buildings are still there, but now there is a drive circling the Capitol and exiting at the Cordell Hull building. And no, I do not know why those two suspended scaffolds are there, nor what they're being used for. Maybe that's how they got the sheep up here. We just don't know. This photo is circa 1955, again viewing the building from the southwest. There are many photographs of this building, but almost always from this same vantage point showing the west side of the building. This photo is circa 1961. Notice that the old Department of Health buildings are now gone, replaced by a parking lot. And another one, 1960s. What I like about this one, though, is that you can finally see the three sculpture groups on the west side of the building, but also notice there were three entrances on that side of the building as well. The auditorium, mentioned in a newspaper article earlier and now known as the Nashville Municipal Auditorium, would be built to the east of the building and opened in 1962. Here you can see the auditorium on the right, the Cordell Hull building behind it, and the Capitol in the center back. The Capitol Hill redevelopment project was now a decade old, changing the look of Capitol Hill completely, with the Cordell Hull building as the co-centerpiece, matched by that new State Librarian archives on the other side, both yielding only to that Capitol building for years to come. And another aerial view, now from the northeast, probably 1960s. Note the steam plant still on the north slope of the Capitol. This is the result of that Capitol Hill redevelopment project. And that's what it looked like a decade earlier. Circa 1973. Note that the traffic is now going in the opposite direction. The building is now 20 years old and is no longer considered the new state office building. Unfortunately, time took a toll on that building, as it does on all of us. By the 20-teens, the writing was on the wall. The Cordell Hull building had reached the end of its useful life. On January 30th, 2013, the Tennessean reported that the Department of General Services was calling for the demolition of the now 60-year-old Cordell Hull building. Over 1,400 people signed a petition urging officials to not destroy the building, but to preserve its history and legacy. But nothing could be done to stop the destruction, except at Governor Haslam's January 2015 inauguration, two people sat beside each other and discussed the fate of the Cordell Hull building. And there, House Speaker Beth Harwell said to Senate Speaker Ron Ramsey, instead of spending a fortune renovating Legislative Plaza, let's look at the Cordell Hull. Let's see if we can turn it into a legislative office building. And whereas in 2013, plans for demolishing the Cordell Hull building were proposed. However, this plan was questioned and challenged by the local community and met with outcry by journalists, historic preservationists, the Metro Historical Commission, Tennessee Preservation Trust, Historic Nashville Incorporated, the Tennessee Historical Commission, and the general public. A petition to save the building garnered more than 1,000 signatures, and the government listened. By August 2014, plans were being considered to renovate the Cordell Hull building instead of destroying it. The plan then was to use this building to house state workers while other buildings were being renovated. But remember which branch of government controls the budget. By May of 2015, the plans were set. The Cordell Hull building would become the new home of the Tennessee General Assembly. A building built for $7.5 million, not including partitions, would get a $126 million renovation to turn it into the legislative office building. A company called Scansa provided pre-construction and construction management services for the interior and exterior renovations. The project included demolition of the Central Services Building, complete interior demolition and renovation of the historic Cordell Hull building, installation of a 450 linear foot underground Capitol connector linking the Cordell Hull building to the State Capitol building, and a 3-story parking garage with a green roof. Careful measures were taken to protect historic elements of the building, including the custom pink marble lining the interior hallways and sculpture groupings by per-year MEMS. The renovated building will serve as the new home for Tennessee's legislature in November 2017. And another company called Centric Architecture was selected to do the work of transforming the building into the new home for the state legislature. The project included replacement of all systems, including windows, electrical, plumbing, and HVAC, as well as the addition of a small 150-space below-grade parking structure and a tunnel connecting to the state capitol building. Needless to say, the most challenging piece of the project was not the removal of 9 columns from the first floor of an 11-story building, but the consternations or conservations around blasting a new tunnel directly beneath the 180-year-old state capitol building. That 450-foot tunnel, proposed over 60 years earlier but never built, would run from the southwest corner of this building to the center of the Capitol building, or rather to 2 stories below the center of that Capitol building to connect to the elevators extended down to there. That tunnel is a football field and a half in length, rising up the entire way to the Capitol and running beneath the Andrew Jackson equestrian statue on the East Lawn. That tunnel was later named the Lieutenant Governor Speaker of the Senate Ron Ramsey Tunnel, probably the longest name of any tunnel in this state. On Thursday, December 14th, 2017, the ribbon was cut, and the 110th General Assembly of the state of Tennessee officially moved into their new home. Of course, it was not just legislators and staff who moved. The composite photographs of past General Assemblies, which once lined the hallways of the War Memorial Building and the Legislative Plaza, were carefully moved and arranged throughout this building. Those composites date back to the 1800s and decorate the hallways outside members' offices. And yes, the list of all of those composites is in the Legislative Library. A cafeteria and snack floor would be added to the first floor of this new legislative office building. And that first floor would also house committee rooms for all legislative committees and subcommittees. The General Assembly has come a long way from using the rooms surrounding the House chamber as its only committee rooms. This building would get a world-class interior redesign. The committee rooms would be made available and accessible, and every word said in every committee room would be recorded and streamed around the world. Mementos and treasures from the committee rooms of the War Memorial Building would be carefully relocated to their new home in the committee rooms of the Cordell Hull Building. The 8th floor, which once housed laboratory sheep, would provide conference rooms for legislators, staff, and others. The exterior of the building got a thorough cleaning and necessary repair, and the grounds around the Cordell Hull Building got a significant upgrade, including the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Beth Harwell Plaza, to the south of the building. Other offices also moved into this newly renovated building. The building would gain its own mail room, its own supply center, but kept the same supply officer. The Tennessee Civil Rights Crimes Information, Reconciliation, and Research Center would gain offices in the newly refurbished building. And even the members of the press would get an office suite for them to use ever how they use it. And whereas, prior to the second regular session of the 110th General Assembly, the members of the General Assembly and the legislative staff moved their offices into the newly renovated Cordell Hull Building. And whereas the true grandeur of the Cordell Hull Building exists in its interior, the entire building features floor-to-ceiling Tennessee marble, some of which is a variety of black marble that no longer exists in the state. And whereas the General Assembly drew inspiration for the new building from the design ideals of mid-century federal office buildings and meeting and conference rooms in Washington, D.C. Centric Architecture was asked to perform the work and transformed the building into one that embodies the enduring authority, stature, and dignity of the Tennessee General Assembly. And whereas the Cordell Hull Building is a most fitting edifice, and the move into this historic building marks an exciting new chapter in the history of the Tennessee General Assembly. And we're still not done with it. In December 2024, the Walter T. Durham Library Collection was added to the first floor of this building after being donated to the state Senate by his family after his passing. Walter T. Durham served as state historian from 2002 until his passing in 2013. And this bookcase houses some of his personal collection of books and research materials. And please don't forget that this building and this legislature has one hell of a library of its very own on this 8th floor, only adding to the history and future usefulness of this building. And as Centric Architecture put it, it's a real win for the state of Tennessee to have saved and improved the rock-solid Cordell Hull building, giving it at least another 60 years of service to the community and to the Tennessee General Assembly. And so, the next time you're going in or out of this grand building, take a moment to think of this building's history, its importance to the state, its part in the Capitol Hill redevelopment project, its sheer size, and how close we came to losing this building forever. And think of the time that the legislature approved and named a building in the 1950s, saved that same building from destruction in the 2010s, and then made this building its home for decades to come. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all of my time. Thank you for your time.